Are you having trouble losing weight? It could be due to insulin levels that are out of balance. Learn what fat-flushing food helps balance your insulin levels. It's basically a hormone that determines how much fat your body stores. Over 240,000 women have successfully melted unwanted fat off their body fast, faster than you would think possible, keeping it off for good. Learn how so many people have melted fat so quickly. Click the link below.
Away from it. And there's really not a lot of money in newspapers anymore, so they don't have the journalists they used to have and the people they used to be able to put on a story to make sure that
and they can't get the advertisers to advertise because they don't want any part of it, which is this whole self-fulfilling prophecy. I had a story just recently where my husband, a woman that he works with, her niece was being trafficked. And she was in a hotel room, and it's a long story how she got there, but to make a long story short, she called the local area police to come and save her, and they were the police never showed up, but they called these nonprofit, independent funded trafficking organizations, and they came and surrounded the hotel, and she ended up being safe, but the local police didn't even show up.
That's a subject. It's hard. It's hard. The concept of policing has gotten harder too. That's part of where I'm trying not to throw rocks. The departments are run by, there's politics and all of this stuff, and if they don't think it's an issue, it's not an issue. It goes back to how the city is run. I had a police chief tell me that if I said the things I've said to you, and this has to do with what we're talking about, my city council would fire me.
See, and that's what I mean. And why? Why would you be fired for telling the truth?
I'm going to tell you one more really sad story along those lines. I had a principal of a grade school. I was brought in to talk to the teachers about the punishment model and the trauma-informed model. That principal successfully used the trauma-informed model, but he had 4 teachers out of 60 that hated him and that hated the lack of punishment to these children. And they were politically successful. And even after my half day with them, and I got a lot of nice reviews, almost all of them were. Those 4 were not nice reviews. They had him fired. I told him to lawyer up and sue the county, and he did. And as a practical matter, he did get fired. The kids lost, the teachers lost, the community lost. That's how we govern right now. We've got the politics of meanness, and I feel terrible about it, whether you're a police chief, a police officer, a teacher, a superintendent. Every institution is suffering under the mental health issues my kids have. And when I talk to really removed people that say they don't want to talk about it, I say you won't want to talk about it until one of my kids stabs or robs or rapes one of your kids. Then you're going to worry about what could I have done. And I'm trying to tell you now that crisis nurseries, mental health services, trauma-informed way of approaching this would solve this. I say overnight. That's not exactly true, but quickly. If we treat these children the way they need to be treated, as opposed to putting them in jail, with the violence, our jails, our even juvenile justice systems and group homes are unable to deal with the level of mental health issue we have created in this nation at this time.
Well, but long term, what does that do to our country? Now you don't like the conspiracy thing. I think that when we have a situation that is so obvious, so out of control, and nobody will deal with it, I have to start questioning why won't they? It doesn't make sense to me. I think it's because there are people who are involved, who are in high places of power, who want to keep it the way it is. And I've heard that from a lot of people, from CIA people, from a lot of connected people around who have heard this story. And, when you're working actually with the children, I guess it doesn't matter one way or another, but why these kids are the way they are. But I have to get to the point that I feel like it's on purpose to a certain degree because, okay, there's the punishment model, but then there's all these politicians who are being pressured by people who are in power, who benefit for the system to stay this way.
That's not a conspiracy. It's a fact of life. Greed drives, how do I say this? Our capitalist system is one of the meanest on the planet. I'm an old capitalist. I'm an old business person. On the one hand, I love it. On the other hand, this unregulated way of doing things, and on our website, I've got most of what I talk about. We just sent 2 judges to prison for 40 years. 40 years for sending innocent juvenile boys to privatized juvenile detention centers. They made millions of dollars.
But see,
and so we could go on.
But that's not capitalism as much as corruption and criminal evil behavior that needs to be
right. Well, yeah, no, you're right. But actually, the piece that's capitalism is that we have decided to farm out a lot of things that we're having trouble with. One of them is group homes. That's a pretty good thing. A privatized prison system is just a bad idea. We need to treat people well. Back to, I haven't talked enough about the European models. People hate that. But as a practical matter, it works.
Well, and let me interrupt, and I want you to get back to that because it's really important. And I have to say this. They're confusing a free market, what free market principles are, with privatizing everything. You can't privatize something and turn it into a free market when the free market principles aren't there. But that's a whole nother issue. And prisons and group homes and child welfare, doesn't have the free market principles. And so they're trying to privatize it, and they're confusing all these issues. But please go into the European model and why it worked and why they did it.
Okay, before I do that, I'm going to take what you just said and take it a step higher. In 2014, I mentioned they put 20,000 1- and 2-year-olds on Prozac. The same year, they fined Big Pharma billions and billions of dollars for illegally selling those drugs to pediatricians for use on very small children. And that's why the amount of drugs is pumped into. Once that process started, that is a big part of how we manage children in child protection.
Alzheimer's and dementia are the most misunderstood, cruelest, and costly of all diseases. Dementia starts 30 to 50 years before symptoms appear. Every 3 seconds, someone gets diagnosed. 10% at age 65, 25% at age 75, and 50% at age 85 will be diagnosed. But symptoms are reversible despite what conventional medicine will tell you. Research has conclusively shown that what you do or don't do in your middle years can greatly impact your risk of Alzheimer's. Make simple changes discussed in the free 26-page report available below. You will also be signed up for the free summit when you download this free report. You will learn the best foods, herbs, and supplements for brain health. And by following these, it will dramatically reduce the chance you'll end up with this devastating issue. Take action now before memory loss is irreversible.
It's levels and levels of corruption that are ignored in a blind eye because people in the system make money from it. And that's what I get to.
Okay, that's right. That is right. People belong in jail for those things. And they didn't. No one went to jail. They pay billions of dollars, and as far as GlaxoSmithKline or some of those other big firms are concerned, that's a rounding error.
Well, yeah, their fine is less than they make, so who cares? Let's get fined every few years, but we make a way more doing it, so just fine us. Okay, we'll fine you, we'll pat you on the back, and just keep doing it.
And we end up with children that become state wards for 30, 40, and 50 years because they grow into adulthood, they go into juvenile justice. Our Chief Justice, Supreme Court Supreme Justice Kathleen Blatz has made this statement that 90% of the kids in juvenile justice came through child protection. And her statement is that the difference between that poor child and a felon is about 8 years. I love her. She's done more for the courts here and for child protection, I think, than so many. But back to the international approach to working with poor families, at-risk children. After the Second World War, those nations were devastated, and they knew And by the way, I'm stealing this from a board member who wrote a complete treatise, 200 pages, called Nation Out of Step, David Strand. And he did the statistical analysis of the difference between how the rest of the world handles their at-risk children and how we do. And the results are just ridiculous. We really do have 10 times the homicides, gun violence, a lot of things. But the rest of the world,
and I keep saying this, it all stems from what we do to children. But keep going.
So they built child-friendly things like daycare centers and quality mental health services in the 50s and the 60s, and child boxes, and they made it easy for young families to be. That's where the socialism came in, and people hate the labeling of things, but basically they wanted people to have a net so that you couldn't be left at home with a baby and not have formula. You couldn't be left at home with a baby and not have a crib. The story I tell about this, and it's just accidental, I picked up a Minnesota Reader back in the day when a Reader was a paper in our neighborhood here, and it was a story of a girl that had been 15 years old in Norway. She was a druggie, she had a baby, and twice or three times a week she found the Norwegians knocking on her door with diapers, formula, food. What do you need? You got a baby. We want to make sure that baby's healthy in our country. We don't do that here.
Yeah, because people don't see that child. And this isn't a communist socialist idea. This is, they're in my community. And if that child isn't well taken care of, it's going to affect me later on with my taxes, with who my children have to interact with, not having good people to work jobs, this neighborhood's not being safe, all sorts of reasons.
If people understood the money, and actually, I'll give you a minute on that. Art Rolnick was the Federal Reserve Board director here in Minnesota. In 2003, he and Rob Grunwald did an extensive study on return on investment of early childhood programs. Now, his study had to do with across the board, all children. And as a Federal Reserve Bank director, I mean, big guy, smart guy, he came out and he said that the best investment any government can make is in its youngest citizens, because they are the future. And I like to quote, I think it's Pliny the Elder that says that what we do to our children, they will do to society. And that's 2,000 years old. So between him and Art Rolnick, I got started on this. And we're doing now a study of the financial impact of traumatized children on teachers and education, on law enforcement, jails and prisons, on adoptive families, foster families, the child protection system. It is impacting insurance that we pay for at our home. And when I wrote the book in 2005, and everything I say is on our website, invisiblechildren.org, but when I wrote the book in 2005, the cost of crime in America from insurance numbers was between $1 and $1.5 trillion a year, depending how you valued the rape, assault, and murder of your friends and neighbors. If you valued it high, and I do, if my wife, if my family is injured, and believe me, even a burglary, even a thing as simple as a burglary, where somebody kicked in your front door and took the TV or whatever, that makes your neighborhood less valuable. It makes you stay awake late at night and maybe drink too much. I don't know. Maybe buy a gun, maybe do something dumb. But I tell people that when my kids go back out on the street, they're doing damage. They're working out of the amygdala, that reptilian part of their brain, as often or more often, and they make bad choices, do terrible things. And I'm going to get into that a little bit now, because my kids have a self-loathing. Children that are abused think they think they brought it on themselves. There's something so deep in abuse that when a child, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, they don't have something else to compare this to. All they know is where they are. And that's what they're going to be for the rest of their lives, unless you and I get involved and try and help them understand that they didn't bring on the sexual assault. They didn't bring on. You're not responsible for getting beat up.
They didn't do anything wrong.
They think they did. The self-hate that I have experienced with all my kids, and they do. They have come to me where they live vicariously in general. They trust the wrong people, they do the wrong things, and they build a life of self-hate because they don't have the coping skills. They don't have the skill to sit in a chair in third grade and listen to the teacher and be just nonchalant and take the information in. They are at high anxiety because that's what their life is. And they do not take education well. They impact the numbers badly, and they impact the people around them and the teacher. And they're self-harming, and they harm other people.
And our bottom line, what you're trying to do is put a dam, like stop there. Okay, we have issues going, with the kids that are already and that we've messed up with, and let's do the best we can with them. But for this new generation, let's stop it. Let's fix it. We don't need to continue the way we are forever. We can make a difference now with this younger generation and stop this from, because, think of it, all these kids that are just so messed up, what our natural instinct is to keep our kids away from them. We almost want this Mad Max kind of scenario where let's all ship them to an island and keep them away from us normal people, right? That's the prison idea. That's the whole idea with these kids. And it's such an evil thought. It's such a bad thought when you're not doing what you can to deal with them when they're very young, where we didn't have to have this whole undesirable society that we built up.
And add to that the nature of the racial issues that we have. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, we arrested 44% of the adult men in 2001. No duplicate arrests, 58%
of the black adult men.
Yeah, 58% of those men went on to be rearrested for a second crime within 2 years. And the racial disparity and the way that the police are, everybody's under assault, really. Every institution has to deal with what's going on. And so the police are trained to be a little bit harder, a little bit more violent than they used to be. As a younger man, I was a troubled guy anyway. I've been in a lot of squad cars, and I could tell the story quite personally about how well I was treated by my police department. They brought me home. They talked to my mom, a single mom. Today, that's a lot of harder deal. And there's a chip on the shoulder of people that grew up in these homes. And
but you understand it, right? You understand that chip. You understand how the police can be hardened too. It is hard. They're dealing with hard stuff.
It's terrible. It really is. It's harder to be a cop these days. It's harder to be a teacher. It's harder to be a social worker or a foster parent. I talk to so many people as foster parents and adoptive parents, and the level of mental health trouble that they are forced to deal with, the amount of Prozac, Ritalin, Zoloft, and then, the county gets blamed and they circle the wagons and things get tight and the news is bad. No one wins, and we're not supporting the people that are doing the work.
Well, and so the bottom line is fix the floodgates. Fix the source of the issue, and we're always going to have the ones that have already fallen through. But if you can fix that floodgate and the source of the issue, now it gets back to, there's a movie that came out on Mr. Rogers. I thought it was a really good documentary. Right. And he was accused of creating this feel good, easy, everybody should be entitled. And what I liked about the movie is the message is we're not creating entitlement. Nobody should feel entitled. Nobody should think they should get things just because. What we're trying to send the message is everybody has value and deserves to be loved. This is a Christian value. Everyone has value and deserves to be loved. Nobody deserves entitlement. Nobody on the planet deserves that. But love, everyone deserves that. And that's the message he was trying to send. I think it's beautiful. I liked that documentary. But during that time, he was just creamed for this whole entitlement thing. And I think that's the same pushback that you're going to get on solving this flood. But the flood is better from all sides of the aisle. It saves money. It saves crime. It saves the children. It's the Christian way to, any Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, any religion that is worth their salt knows that you have to care for the weakest of you. And if we can stop that flood, then we can start healing all of our communities. Healing our police, healing our institutions. We're all suffering.
Actually, the optimist in me will tell you this. I have seen it happen where we've broken the chain of abuse in a family. And when you do that, you go from 4, 5, or 6 kids having 4, 5, or 6 families that are abusive, just like the family they came from, to 4, 5, 6 kids having normal families, paying taxes, leading normal lives. I believe this could be changed in one generation. I do. I believe that over a 10 or 15-year period, if we hit it hard with trauma-informed and start dismantling a prison system that's been so unfair, so racist, so brutal. You get to California and the federal government actually made them dump 10,000 pretty dangerous people out on the street because of how hard and terrible their system was, how overcrowded it was. I mean, when we did the thing back in 2001 with the 44% of African American men being arrested here, the argument I would have with people, and they would push back and they'd say, well, they broke the law, they deserve to be. Well, what's the right number for you? 70, 80, 90%? Everybody black goes to prison? I mean, where does this end?
And I got to push back just a little bit. It's not just black. It's expanded to people who are poor. People who are of a certain, you know what I'm saying? We've become less racist in being brutal.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a whole subject about the kingpin laws and how we made the drugs absolutely poisonous and everybody gets to go to jail for that. Now we're starting to turn that around. But the results of people that get out of prison, that can't get a job, that go back and have mental health issues, and there's nowhere near the facilities to take care of that, it's not pretty. It's not easy. I've had my head handed to me, several times by African American men that have really stepped up and really tried. Never going to make more than 10, 15 bucks an hour, and yet they're trying to make things right for a family and do things. It's hard at every step. The police still stop them on hot summer days. It's hard, and it's hard on the police.
People who say that racism isn't still there are living in, because I coached hockey for 15 years in the most competitive areas. I know what I experienced racism, or not racism, but sexism. I experienced discrimination, right? If I could feel the difference when I was there. And I go into different environments and I can feel the difference. It's like a weight off your shoulder. People just, they don't even think about it. They just respect you. And so if all you feel is the respect all the time and that you know that you don't discriminate and your friends don't discriminate, you might think it doesn't exist anymore. But it does exist in certain pockets, and everybody, I mean, we're getting better. We are getting better. When you look at back in the early 70s and before, I mean, there were some really bad things that were going on. We are so much better than we were then. But I can tell you just based on my own experience, and I'm just a white woman, who knows what they experience. I could feel the difference. And that's because the sporting world is very, discriminates. Everybody knows it is. So they know what I'm saying is true. And I was tough. I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter. I got to do what I got to do. And I'm doing this for the kids and I'm going to do the best job I can. But it was still hard. And I know how it affected my confidence. I know how it affected me. It was hard. Think of how it affected the little girls that had to see that and the little kids that had to see me being discriminated against all the time. Yeah. So it's the same thing, except it's racism or whatever else. And I know that in the circles that I go, the discrimination is a lot less. I don't want to be racist. I don't want to discriminate, and either do the people I'm around. So we don't see it as often, but it exists. And to not admit it is to denying, not being intellectually honest.
Well, I'm not going to argue. Statistically, when you do, I do reporting, and we're followed by Reuters and a couple other news agencies on national child protection issues, and you just see that poor people in general are having a great struggle, whether it be health, mental health, just housing, the homeless population. When you get into the violence done to homeless children versus violence done to people that are having a good family, it's almost it's a prison sentence. It's a life sentence. They don't get the education. They don't get out of that trap of being poverty stricken and low education, the ability in this world now. I won't say you have to have an advanced education, but you have to have more than a GED as a rule to have a good life.
You have to have the ability you have to have those foundational characteristics that make you hardworking and thinking and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
If it didn't come from your family, then it's not going to come from just picking it up on your own. I mean, 1 out of 100, 1 out of 50. I don't know what the numbers are, but no, I know when I speak, I don't have happy stories from my kids in child protection. I have kids that struggled and struggled and struggled, and they became young mothers, or they become involved in juvenile justice, and I feel it's hard. It's hard on the people doing the work. We as a people need to know that the cost to society, where we used to be number 1, 2, 3, 4 in all the quality of life indices, back to the thing I said about the European model and how come they've got mentally healthier people and just a fraction of the prison population we have. That if you take care of kids, they'll grow up and have normal lives. Coping skills come easily to children if someone's there to give them coping skills. And the number of coping skills you have, it's a pretty basic formula. I can go out and get in trouble and go to jail, and tomorrow I can be back to work because I know how to do that, and I ain't going back to jail because I didn't like it. But if you're a young person that's parents have been in jail and then you go to jail, you can't stay out of jail. The whole thing's working against you. We don't need to do that anymore. It's not helping anybody. It's expensive. And my kids really do cause a lot of pain to a lot of people. A lifetime of one of my kids can affect hundreds, if not thousands of people, just from small to large problems. I mean, burglaries and one of my boys just liked to break windows downtown, big expensive windows. That was something he liked to do.
Just don't do that. It doesn't matter. And if you tell him not to do it, he might do it more.
Yeah. He's a boy, just for instance, now this is back to drugs, but they had him on Ritalin. And Ritalin was stopped in, I think, Sweden in 1968 because of the suicides. And the thing about Ritalin is it's a cocaine derivative. And that boy realized that, and he likes street drugs more.
Oh,
but I mean, what's the difference?
Okay. You have a program that you're doing with universities around the country. Can you talk about that and then also talk about your website?
Thank you. We have a program that tries to tell this large, comprehensive story in graphics, and it's done in a trade show sort of way. If you can visualize, when you go to a trade show, you see these big graphics up. And they tell the stories, the personal stories, the statistics, articles around the nation, and we personalize it to the college that brings us in. And there's videos. There's so many powerful videos that are showing on a loop, about 8-hour loop, so you won't see the same video twice. And the concept is to work with the college so that they'll invite us in, and in so doing, they reach out into their community to those organizations that need volunteers. So whether it's Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the CASA program, there's many, many organizations doing a great deal of work that need help volunteer-wise. And so they're going to recruit from the college and from the community. And the idea is to start a conversation that goes on long after we leave. Now, we leave behind 20%, or we're hoping that we can leave behind 20% of the graphics and the visuals so that they can do this again on their own schedule. And the idea is to kick it off with a big presentation and bring in some of the legislators and policymakers so that they get to see this and understand more about child protection and how it impacts not just the kids, but the schools and the law enforcement, the social workers, and foster and adoptive homes. There's a great shortage of foster and adoptive homes in this country at this time. And again, back to all the issues of privatizing and people that know more make better decisions. That's what this is about. At the same time, being able to bring in volunteers. I mean, some people are willing to do the 40 hours of training or so for the Guardian ad-Litem program. And some people can't. They can only do once a year, do some things, but it's all important. And if they are just simply more aware, they'll vote for more child protection, quality daycare, crisis nurseries, the things that are important, early childhood programs. And that'll make that community a much healthier place 5 years down the road. And the website that we maintain is national in scope. We try to put a link to everything that's said, and I'm going to just read you a couple of things now. A sheriff from Chicago just did an Aspen Ideas Festival talk about how his jails are the largest mental health facility in the country. And when you hear him talk, it'll move you. And Maury's video, the group homes in Florida,
Maury with the foster shock.
Yeah. Now, she was a guardian ad-Litem, took her own money, made this powerful film about what happened to Florida when they privatized the group homes and they're prostituting young girls out of those group homes. I had it happen in Minnesota, but not like it is in Florida. The
sex trafficking, and that's what I'm talking about. Yes.
Well, yeah, it's awful. And I try to make sure that the website is current, and the resources so that you can look up the studies we speak of. So when I say that 1 out of 3 American children is reported to child protection by his or her 18th birthday, there's a link to that study out of Washington University. And, you can argue with the numbers, but as a practical matter, it's within 10% most of the time.
It's way too high.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
You can argue, but the numbers are so high.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay.
And so really to bring support to the people doing the work and understanding for the rest of us so that we make better decisions. And there are politicians that fight tooth and nail to not have these things happen. One of our past governors told my board member, David Strand, that children that are the victims of failed personal responsibility are not my problem, nor are they the problem of the state of Minnesota. That borders on evil to me. I can't stand that in my politics.
What bothers me about that is it's so short-sighted because the costs, this is where I get back to, it's a nonpartisan issue. The costs are enormous to society. It's so much less expensive to stop that floodgate than to allow it to. So whether you are conservative, fiscally conservative, whether you're a Christian, whether you're into social systems and stuff. Now, the only thing I can think of people who would be okay with having this flood and this exponential growth of trauma are people who are involved and benefit from it. Or they're evil. I've come to that conclusion.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of money in it. That's true. I stand back and just say that you can't throw 2-year-olds away. There's not a religion in the world that allows you to abandon children. There just isn't. Never has been, never going to be. So people that come to me and they are generally religious in nature, by nature, this nation is very religious, and they make these arguments. But if you're religious and you have to say, what would Jesus do? Or something along those lines for your own particular religion, it would be take care of the baby. You can't not take care of a baby. And that's what we're doing at Kids at Risk Action, invisibleChildren.org, is that we tell the stories. There's a statistics page up there that's about the 7th one in. There's a scrolling video. And if you click on that, you'll get the national statistics. There's 100 of them. And you'll see where your state fits. If you go to Real Stories and Sad Stories under Learn, you will get the national news every month of child protection issues in this country. There's 1,000 stories, and you get to pick your state out.
Well, thank you so much. And you're an American hero for what you're doing. And I can't thank you enough for dedicating your entire life to doing this.
Thanks for having me, my friend. I appreciate your kind words.